Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where you can be, belong, and become the very best version of yourselves. So, again, wherever you're joining us, we want to just thank you for journeying with us through all of these books of the Bible, but specifically today, Genesis. We're going to continue moving through this book. And before we do, let me remind you, down below you'll see a bunch of descriptions. You'll see how you can basically help fund what we do. We do a lot of things through Ethos, and so we do podcasts, blogs, we do live discussions every month. We do a lot of different things, and so it all takes money and resources. So please consider donating, being a part of what we do. Also, make sure you subscribe at the bottom. We'd love to see more and more subscribers, more and more shares on all of the different avenues that we have video. And so, anyways, today we talk about Genesis. We continue the conversation about this Origins book. And so, a reminder, this is not a history book, right? This is not a book written to encapsulate a specific exact data of a tribe, the exact dates, all these things. That was never the point of this book. Again, when we look at the context, it all begins to make sense. This is a tribal group of people named the Israelites. And this group of people, they, like many tribes, they were conquered over and over and over again. Egypt, Babylon, Syria, so many different empires, Rome. You have all these different empires that would come in, they would essentially destroy Israel, right? They would take their city hostage and they'd march their people hundreds of miles on feet, right? They'd take them to their empire and they would essentially attempt to assimilate them because that's what you did as an empire, a powerful empire. And so what most tribes would do is they would begin to accept their gods. You know, the Babylonian gods become your gods because obviously the Babylonian gods are stronger than your gods because you lost, right? But not Israel. Israel is one of those very rare tribes that they find a way to hold on to their identity, their values, their metaphors, all of it. They hold on to it. And this is how they do it. They essentially take all of those stories, right? All of the campfire stories, the metaphors, the rules, the regulations, the prophetic warnings, they put all of that into a compilation that we know as Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And so again, Torah is a written response to the fears of assimilation. And this is what you have in these scrolls. Again, you have poetry, mythology, warnings from different tribal leaders, different kings. All of this is a part of these writings. And Israel would argue this is holy in the sense that it is so good and essential for Israel in order to keep their identity. It's beautiful. And so we use this phrase a lot. Specifically in this series we're doing, and I think it makes sense. So, Torah is a complete narrative of Israel, miniaturized through its tellings. So, one more reminder: every time we read this, we look for the character of Israel. And so Israel is found in Adam. Israel is found in Eve. Israel is found in Abraham, Moses, Jonah, Noah. You see the character, the nation of Israel, in this interesting metaphor of a person. And they will make the same decisions, they'll go through the same trials, the same brokenness. You'll see this over and over again. That doesn't mean that these people didn't actually live. We don't know for sure, but Moses, he could have been a very real person. Abraham, the point of it is not whether this person was real or not. It's what the person symbolizes and the reason for the telling. It was not history. It was deep, deep metaphor for Israel to keep their identity. Beautiful. And so you and I, we worked through Genesis 1. We again looked at this God that steps into the chaos, brings order, removes all the stuff off the table, begins to clear it off, and then begins to put things on the table. And it's this powerful illustration that Babylon's God creates chaos. But Israel is a tribe of people that seek order and life. And so, of course, their God does the same. Perfect sense. And so again, chapter 1 is more of a poem. If you were to look at the original writers, they wrote this more as a poem. It would have been sung, right? It would have been shared as poetry. chapters 2 and on, what we have is more narrative structure. This is a story. This is something told around the campfires, right? So this is a much deeper story. And this is why, again, we know this is not a literal telling, because Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, they don't agree, right? They don't agree in how everything comes to be. The times are all different, right? One day Adam is born, and the other day the son is there. It's all a bit different. I've included a graph here. Take a look at it. You'll see it's not literal history. That was never the point. It's a narrative, a deeper picture of Israel. And when we get that, the whole thing pops. It just hums. It makes sense. So today, we're going to look at Genesis 3, 6 through 10. And I know some of you listening, you're thinking, what? Like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, only 5 verses? Like, that's not many. But if you think about it, we just looked at chapter 3, 1 through 5, and we spent a whole entire conversation there, 30 plus minutes. The point of this is that these letters, these stories, they're so deep, packed with meaning. And so when we take time to dissect it, understand it, man, there's so much application for today. But we can only do that when we look at the original context of what the writers actually intended, right? Then we can pull back and say, what does it mean for me today? And so that's what we do. So Genesis 3, 6 through 10 starts like this. And the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and the tree was desirable to make one wise. So she took of its fruit, and she ate it, and she gave also of her husband with her, and he ate it. And the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves and made themselves girdles, not griddles. And they heard the voice of the Lord going in the garden to the direction of the sun. And the man and his wife hid from before the Lord in the midst of the trees of the garden. And the Lord God called the man, and he said, "Where are you?" And he said, "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I am naked, so I hid." And he said, God said, "Who told you that you are naked? Have you eaten from the tree which I commanded you not to eat?" And the man said, "The woman who you gave to be with me gave me the tree, so I ate." And the Lord God said to the woman, "Was it this that you have done?" And the woman said, "The serpent enticed me, and I ate." Again, notice, we're going to get to this in a minute. And the woman saw that the tree was good for food. So let's think about this now. All right, we're going to go verse by verse. Notice this. The woman from the very get-go, the woman notices something. She sees that the tree was good for food. She notices something. She sees it with her eyes. It says it was a delight to the eyes. Now, whenever you look at the Old Testament, what you'll notice is every time something's delightful, right? Anytime that there's an enticement involved, we get the word temptation. And temptation essentially comes from me noticing this carnal thing, this thing that I want. You notice it, you take sight of it. It's not necessarily your brain at work. Typically, your eyes notice first. You see it. You begin to desire it. And that's actually what the word in the Hebrew means here. It means she literally begins to desire it. She sees it, she wants it. It's a lizard brain kicking in, right? Sees, wants, I must have. Right? I'm hungry. I'm going to eat. You're not using your gray matter in this moment. You're just observing and you see, and your brain says, I want it. Right? This is the beginning of what we call temptation. And so think about this. Colin Kammerer, he's a behavioral experimental economist in California Institute of Technology. And so what he did is some interesting studies of the brain. And he said, look, we've got the prefrontal cortex. This is where we make decisions. This is where we have reason, logic. This is the thing that keeps us from getting out of our car on the freeway and yelling at someone because they honk the horn. We use this a lot, or we should be using our prefrontal cortex. I'm afraid often we don't, right? But we should be using this, right? Reason, logic. This is where it happens, right there in the front. And this is why kids should wear helmets, right? We don't want to damage this. Yeah, this is important. He also says there's this thing called the amygdala. It's very tiny, really. The amygdala. There's a part in your brain that basically it's where fear right? Fear happens. It's where desire, right? Lust, those kind of things, very tiny. But here's the interesting thing about the two. Today, often, I would argue many people function with amygdala over prefrontal cortex. And really, when you consider temptation, typically it's that amygdala part of the brain that kicks in first. And then later on, wisdom might be developed only when this part kicks in. And so what he had to say about this is really interesting. He said, not a second goes by that our ancient dog brains aren't conferring with our modern cortexes to influence their choices. So those two pieces of the brain, they're constantly talking to each other. They're keeping each other in check. Interesting, right? It just happens. We're not even aware of it. He says this, your prefrontal cortex is usually at odds with your lizard brain. The goal is to help them align. The goal is to work together, right? And so here's the thing, when temptation comes, when you see the thing that you want and you don't think it through, oftentimes we're going to end up in trouble. Right? So the beautiful thing about a prefrontal cortex is that it causes us to stop and consider. Stop, take a moment, consider. Allow our reason, right, to catch up with our emotion, right? The amygdala. Allow yourself to stop, make room for wisdom to catch up. Yeah, it's really interesting. And this is really like the deeper lesson for Israel. Look, we know this and this happened, Israel. Before you react, before you jump into another war, before you do this or this or this, take a moment, consider what you're about to do. Because sometimes what we're about to do isn't always the very best thing for us. When we allow lizard brain to kick in rather than prefrontal cortex, we end up in trouble. And this is essentially the idea here of desire, right? Desire's good, and it's good to desire things. That's not a bad thing. But if it's the thing that's making our decisions, we could end up in a lot of pain and brokenness. And I think many of us have been there before. It continues. It goes like this. And the tree was desirable to make one wise. So notice this. She sees the thing. It looks really good. Amygdala's kicking in, right? I see it. I want it. I must have it. And then there's a promise attached, right? I see the thing. There's this new thing. I want it. And in my mind, I think it's going to satisfy, right? And again, this is what temptation does. It offers something that doesn't satisfy, but it gives the promise that it will. Yeah, you see the dessert. You're on this diet. You've been doing so well, right? But then you see the dessert. It's in front of you, and it promises you, eat me. Right? Eat me. It's going to taste so good. You should eat this thing. You'll feel great. It's going to satisfy you. But the problem is you'll eat it and you'll probably feel guilty because you broke your diet, right? You did the thing. You didn't think it through. It promised you happiness, satisfaction. But the truth is it didn't satisfy, did it? There's this story in 2 Samuel. It's really a pretty painful one. And this is really it gets at the heart of this idea of temptation, this idea of desire. And so it's a story about Amnon and Tamar, his stepsister. And so the story goes like this. I'll just read it to you because it is just a heartbreaking story. But notice the very last lines. We'll get to it. In the course of time, Amnon, the son of David, again, notice this. It's David's own son, right? David's son fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. Amnon became so obsessed with his sister Tamar that he made himself ill. Notice this. Sometimes we get so caught up, like, I have to have this thing. If only I had this thing, then I'll be happy, right? You get the thing, you're not happy because it promised you something it cannot deliver. That's what lust and temptation does. It promises something it could never deliver. And so it says he is ill. She was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Notice this. He wants to do something to her, right? Not with her. Notice the aggression already there. I want. Again, lizard, caveman kicks in. I want it. I must have it. That's where we begin to objectify, right? I like that woman. I like that thing. They become objects rather than human beings. This is the direction lust and temptation takes us. It goes on. Amnon had an advisor, Jonadab, son of Shimei. Notice this. Anytime you have a bad idea, there are people that show up who pretend to be your friend, don't they? They show up and yeah, you should totally do it, right? You should do this thing. You should buy that thing. You should date this girl, whatever it is. They always create possibilities for you to do the thing you should probably not do. Yeah, so he shows up. He asks Amnon, why do the king's son, look so haggard morning after morning? Won't you tell me? Again, he's just laying it on thick. He knows. Amnon said to him, I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. He says, go to bed and pretend to be ill, Jonadab said. When your father comes to see you, say to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight so I may watch her and then eat it from her hand. Again, notice how he is deceiving. One deception leads to another, to another, to another. It goes on. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to him, Amnon said to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and make some special bread in my sight so I may eat it from her hand. David sent word to Tamar at the palace, go to the house of your brother Amnon, prepare some food for him. So Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down. She took some dough, kneaded it, made the bread in the sight, and baked it. Then she took the pan, served him the bread, but he refused to eat. Send everyone out of here, Amnon said. So everyone left him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food here into my bedroom so I may eat it from your hand. And Tamar took the bread she had prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. And then it gets pretty nasty, right? But when she took it to give him to eat, he grabbed her and said, come to bed with me, my sister. Again, not a phrase anyone wants to hear, right? No, my brother, she said, don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing, right? Don't do this thing. What about me? What could I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you. But he refused. Again, she tries to find an out. Look, we'll be married first. We'll make this work. He refuses to listen to reason. He sees the fruit. He has heard the promise, right? It will satisfy. And it says here, he was stronger than her, and he raped her. And again, I could go on about how messed up it is when someone takes their power and abuses it on other people who are weaker. We could go on for hours about that. But here's the thing. It says this next, and this is the most painful part for me to read. It says, then Amnon, after raping her, after getting what he wanted, right? It says he hated her. He hated her with intense hatred. Notice that. It's not just a hate, it's an intense hatred. Because here's the thing, it did not satisfy. The temptation, the lust, the thing he thought he had to have did not satisfy. It says he hated her more than he loved her. And he said, get out. Get out. Again, prefrontal cortex pushed aside, right? And now we have a victim. And this is often what happens when we chase things that don't satisfy. When we use the amygdala over the prefrontal cortex, we create victims. There's shame and guilt and pain attached when we do this. And so the story goes on in Genesis. She ate, and she gave also to her husband who was with her. Notice this too. There's this misnomer that like Eve went off by herself, and because she left her husband's side, now the temptations happen. No. The two were together. They were together. Yeah, they were together. Why did Adam not speak up? You could go into all these different crazy stories. But the thing again, is a story. It's a story. You start taking this way too literally, it gets weird. Right? It gets just weird. But the deeper picture here, she gave some to her husband. They share it together. Right? And notice this. The eyes of both of them are opened. She gets what she's wanting, right? It opens her eyes. The thing is, the problem is, it opens her eyes, and what she sees, she can't take back. They realize now they are naked. She's experienced the new knowledge, and she's not allowed wisdom to catch up. And so what happens? It says they both felt shame, right? They put on the fig underwear, right? The fig bras. They put it on because they feel shame now. They see something they weren't aware of. They don't have the wisdom to help guide them because they chose to walk away from it. And so you took it. You got what you wanted. You realize it didn't satisfy, right? And there is the shame, and it's right there in front of you. And now you got to deal with that. You made the mistake. You didn't think it through. And this is life, isn't it? We've all done it. It continues. And they heard the voice of the Lord going in the garden to the direction of the sun. Again, notice so much metaphor here. God's voice comes from the sun, all these kind of things. And the man and his wife, they hid before the Lord their God in the midst of the trees in the garden. And God called the man. He said to him, "Where are you?" The deeper picture here, again, they felt shame. Before, they were walking in wisdom. They were ordering life together. Now, they lose their direction. They don't allow wisdom to walk in knowledge. They take the temptation, right? They take the promise that this new thing is going to satisfy. It's what they're looking for, right? And it does not give them, it doesn't fulfill them, it doesn't satisfy them. And so when we do this, we lose direction. And shame and guilt, they always follow, don't they? When we go that direction, they always seem to follow. And it ends with this. I heard your voice in the garden. They said, I was afraid because I am naked, so I hid. God said, who told you that you are naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not to eat? Again, so painful, right? Such a painful moment. You tried, you reached out, you thought the thing was going to satisfy. The amygdala over the prefrontal cortex, you thought it was going to satisfy. It didn't. We didn't allow reason and emotion to be married together, did we? And again, perfect picture, ish, man. Again, interesting, ish-ah, right? Ish is emotion, right? Reason is ish-ah. When we don't allow those two to come together and make decisions, wisdom and knowledge, we end up in a lot of pain. We have to allow the reason to catch up with the emotion. The thing was never meant to satisfy. It just wasn't. It never will. The idea of being satisfied is simply a misnomer. Learn how to live and walk in the garden together. Order life together with wisdom and knowledge. That's the beauty here for Israel. And so how do we take it home, right? What do we do with this story? Because there's a lot of stuff in there, isn't there? Here's what we do. One of the lessons definitely we can see here is how to balance emotion and reason. Because they're not bad. Emotion's a good thing, right? Reason's a good thing. But when you remove the two, it gets weird. If you're only functioning on reason and logic, the decisions you make are going to be void of any emotion, and you become a robot. But if you only go with your emotion, you're going to end up in some really painful experiences, aren't you? Yeah, you might just end up naked in a garden. How did I get here? I have no idea. It could be weird, right? The two need to work together. That's the beauty. So here's a couple ideas to consider throughout the week. Number one, remove all prejudicial factors that may impact your choices, right? So when you're trying to think of different, is this a good idea, a bad idea? How do I live with reason and emotion, logic? How do I do this? Remove some of those prejudicial factors in your life that you think, oh, well, I know this or this or this. Get rid of those things. Begin to consider them on a deeper level. Number two, halt. I love this idea. Halt from making decisions when you are in certain states. So again, I'm not talking about if you're in Montana or Minnesota. No, I'm talking states of mind here. So stop, consider what is the state of mind I'm in. Am I extremely anxious and worried? Well, whatever decision I make, that may just affect it in a pretty negative way. I might act out in desperation. So stop and think to yourself, what kind of state of mind am I in right now when you're having to make certain decisions? It's a good way to balance it. Obviously, another one that I think is a fantastic one that often we do, but we kind of downplay. Make a list of pros and cons, the risks, right? Think about the future when you make that decision. When you think the thing's going to satisfy, ask as many questions as possible about the thing. Last one. Finally, search for a happy medium. Let your reason and emotion work together. Say to yourself, okay, these two things, they can work together, right? I can use my emotion. I can be happy, and I can also think, future self, will you be happy? I can do all of that. I can have both. And when you have both, it's usually a pretty solid decision you're making. You can allow balance in your life where reason, logic, emotion, they can all begin to work together. You can allow wisdom and knowledge, passion, energy, all of it. They can walk together with you if you'll allow it. And when we do, oftentimes we end up in a lot less pain, don't we? Yeah. So thank you so much again for joining us today. We have a lot more to go with Genesis, but again, just a couple verses, so much beauty. So as we finish, please consider donating to ethos-church.org/donate. This is tax deductible, so I know it's getting near tax time again. Please consider giving. We love to work with all of you. We just think you are an incredible audience. And so please consider continuing to work with us. Share these videos. Please consider donating, supporting this ministry. Also, if you want to do live discussions with us, if you want to even just listen and just sit back and hear other people discuss it, please consider going to Ethos Living Rooms. We do it the 1st and the 3rd of every month on Saturdays, 10:30 Pacific time. If you can do it, please consider joining. We send you the Zoom link. It is such an awesome experience to be a part of. And lastly, please hit subscribe. Subscribe, hit that bell there on YouTube, and join us every week on YouTube with Ethos. We love y'all. Thank you so much for joining. And we'll see you next week when we discuss this story in an even deeper way. We'll talk about the curses. The curses. Yeah. So everyone take care, and we'll see you next week. Bye.